Welcome to the Chirp YouTube channel. My name is Christy, and I am your friendly online speech-language pathologist and specialist in children's communication development, which includes behavior, because behavior is one type of communication. Today, we are starting a little series about 6 different functional, emotional, developmental capacities and how you can help these developmental skills emerge in your child, especially if you may have noticed that your child is maybe not developing the same as other children. I have put down below for you a little assessment checklist that you can use to sort of figure out where your child has developed up to this point. I am using a model for this series, my favorite model of children's development, called the DIR model. You can find out much more about that in the links that I've put down below, but it is all based on these developmental abilities, these capacities that must be gained in a particular order in order for the child to fully realize his or her potential. The first one, developmental capacity number 1, is self-regulation and interest in the world. Why is this important? Why is this the most important thing? Because if I am not calm, then I cannot learn from the world around me. I cannot build relationships. I cannot focus my attention enough to learn from my environment. And then I'm not going to be successful at learning in a natural way. And I'm not going to be successful at building relationships. And very young children are built to learn from relationships. The very first challenge of human life is to be able to take in the huge amount of sensory information that comes from the world around us, to process it, and to be able to remain calm while doing so. Some children have more difficulty with this than others. Usually signs show up at a very early age. This is a skill that should be mastered by 9 months for the most part. Now, if your child has some sort of a developmental difference, a delay, a disorder in development, then this skill is going to take longer. And just because this skill is not completely mastered does not mean that your child is not making strides in this area. A lot of times children will do things very well in one environment and less well in another environment. You will notice this if you look at the checklist down below. It has the skill listed, and then there are different areas where you can check, my child does this at home in a calm environment. My child can do this out in the community. My child does not do this when stressed. That's normal. Most of us do not remain calm when we are stressed. I myself, I live in Minnesota. I live in the Twin Cities, and as you have seen from my last video, we have been infiltrated by very scary troops who have been shooting people. It's a scary time. I myself have not been calm. I have had to work on self-regulation during this time. And our kids are not going to be good at any skill under stress either. So we have to give them some slack when it comes to which skills we think that they have mastered. But some kids find this easier than others for various reasons. Children who are struggling with this are likely going to be more irritable. They might cry or scream. They might be fussy and indignant. They might not look at you. I'm still looking at you, but my face is looking the other way. There we go. They might refuse to look at activity happening around them. They might not like it if a room has loud noises. They might cry if they hear a noise, a loud noise, the doorbell or a dog barking. That may be very upsetting. They may be very sensitive to their environment, the sensory experiences from their environment. But there is another kind of difficulty in this area also, and this is where children are undersensitive to their environments. Children, perhaps, they're kind of floppy. They're very difficult to engage. They don't really seem interested in anything. They don't respond to you, perhaps, when you do a cute dance, which I'm sure you do, or when you try to get their attention. They just kind of don't respond overall. They maybe seem limp. They seem uninterested. They're very difficult to figure out how to pull them into an interaction with you. Every human being has a different, unique sensory profile. A sensory profile is how our unique bodies react to the sensory information that's coming from all around us all the time. Sensory information is what our physical body takes in from the world around us and transmits to our brain to tell us what is going on. We hear things through our ears. Our brain tells us there's a bird outside. I touch the table with my hand and I realize it is smooth. Perhaps it is clean. Perhaps it is safe for food, or maybe not. My body feels pressure and I realize I'm getting a hug. Someone is hugging me. That makes me feel safe. Our bodies tell us information about the world around us. Our brains have to learn how to assimilate and process all of that information, and it's a lot of information. And there are things in brains that can prevent the learning of that ability to process as quickly. I did a series about the different types, the different modalities of sensory processing right here. It's one of my favorite series I ever did. And I recommend that after you finish this video, you go give it a watch if you haven't already. I think it will help you to understand the different sensory needs of various different children in a deeper way. In this video, I'm going to now proceed to tell you how you can help your children who are having difficulty with developmental capacity, number 1, self-regulation and interest in the world. You need to figure out your child's own unique sensory profile. How do you do this? Well, you experiment. You interact with your child. Shocking. How dare I suggest that you spend your valuable time interacting with your child? I'm telling you, this is the only way to do it. You need to figure out the answer to some of these very important questions. Does my child prefer louder voices or quieter voices? Does my child prefer a louder environment or a quieter environment? Does my child prefer more touch, more physical interaction, or less touch, lighter touch, less physical interaction overall? Does my child prefer quicker movements in her own body or in my body? If I'm moving around all the time, and that's very distracting for my child's brain initially, then maybe I need to move slower. Does my child prefer very animated facial features and communication style? Or does my child prefer a calmer, quieter interaction style? All these things are valid ways of interacting with the world, and children can tune out if we approach them in a way that is not a good match with their sensory processing style. It's a good idea to create for yourself, I'm getting a very angelic glow through the window today. Oh, It's a good idea to write yourself some notes when you are experimenting with your child. If you notice that every time you clap your hands, your child looks away and closes her eyes, that might be an unpleasant sound for her. If every time you start to use a calm voice, your child goes limp and pays no attention to you anymore, then you know you need to ramp it up. You need to be the carnival barker. You need to pull her in and interest her in the world around her, or she will tune out again. Some children need more, some children need less, and it is your job as the main person who interacts with this child to figure this out. I recommend, and in fact the DIR model recommends, that you set aside a couple of times a day, 20 to 30 minutes, to be with your child on the floor. Yes, this is good for you as well. Getting up and down off the floor is a very important skill that we need to maintain into old age. Be on the floor with your child and do things with your child that your child enjoys. Things that encourage back and forth interactions. Back and forth interactions are the number one thing that will predict how well a child does academically. Very shocking, huh? But that is something that we can easily make changes to. If we don't normally have a back and forth interaction with our child ever, then we can work on that. What is a back and forth interaction? A back and forth interaction is when I say, "Wow, look at the bird," and my child says, "Ooh." Or when I look at my child and go, and then my child giggles. These are all examples of back and forth interactions. They all count. It does not have to be verbal. But what these things do is that they wire children's brains for interaction. They wire children's brains for communication. And communication is the bedrock. All of this is the bedrock for all the skills that come later. Find ways to include movement and interaction in what you're playing with your child. For example, if your child's very young, this is going to look very different from if your child is 8 or 10. And I should say at this point, I'll mention this a little more later in this video, but this skill is not necessarily mastered by the time children are 9 months, even though that's the range that this skill typically develops. I have worked with humans across the entire range of human ages, and this is a skill that often needs work later in childhood, sometimes in teenagerhood, and sometimes later if people have a developmental delay that has really affected them, or if they have some sort of acquired difficulty, such as a stroke or a traumatic brain injury. Sometimes we have to go all the way to the very first functional capacity to regain that and then build from there. So if your child has still not mastered this, then work on it in a new way. Work on it through purposeful, playful, enjoyable back and forth interactions. Consider things like, if you have a very young child, carrying your child around, bouncing or dancing with your child in your arms, singing songs, or talking about what you see out the window. Perhaps you are walking outside and you can talk about what you smell and what you see and what you hear. Talking about all these things while doing appropriate eye contact with whatever kind of child you have. If eye contact is very difficult for your child, that's okay. You can look at your child, you can both look at other things. It's still back and forth interactions if you're saying something to your child and your child responds in some way. You cannot necessarily force your child to respond to your communication, but the more that you communicate to a child about things the child is interested in, the more the child is likely to respond. With young children, this is pretty easy. We keep talking, we keep our facial expressions expectant and encouraging and excited and friendly. And eventually a child's going to look at us or laugh, and that's our goal. We want that response. We want that emotional connection. With older children, we usually need to start working on this skill in areas the child likes. So, for example, the student I'm going to talk about a little later in this video, I'm going to call him, goodness, I have to make up names, Ryland. Ryland really liked Thomas the Tank Engine. And so when I began working with him, his issue was almost entirely behavior because of communication deficits and because he did not have this skill. He did not have the ability to remain calm and experience interest in the world around him because he was constantly melting down over the tiniest little things. So this skill is what I worked on with him for a very long time, and eventually success. If your child is very young, do things like Little Piggy Went to Market kind of games with their bodies. You get them up, you get them pretend walking, you help them pretend jump, you do swinging while you're talking about the swinging and the movement of the swinging. When you find an activity that your child enjoys, bring back and forth interaction into it. And we are talking about back and forth interaction without distractions. There will be no phones. There will be no television or radio on during this time. Does anyone listen to the radio anymore? I don't know. This is time for communication. You got to clear off the freeway so that you can communicate effectively. And I know this is hard for us. All of us adults are phone addicted, and we're addicted to noise, and we're addicted to distractions. And if we want our children to have healthy brains, we need to protect our own brains as well. We can do that better by eliminating distractions when we are interacting with children. Also, I should say at this time that even if you feel that your child doesn't really like you or doesn't really want you around, or if your child is happier when she's by herself, that does not mean that it's a good idea to leave your child by herself for long stretches of time. Your child needs to be interacting with other people. This is how learning happens, and this is how the sensory system adjusts to the world. It's very important that children are interacting with adults all the time. Like I said, interactions, back and forth interactions with adults is the number one skill that predicts success in education later. We do not want our children left alone, even if at the beginning your child doesn't look at you. Even at the beginning, if your child cries when you try to have an interaction with him, then we need to learn more acceptable ways, more acceptable to the child, more acceptable ways to interact with this child. We need to practice and figure out and be a sleuth. We need to figure the mystery of this child out so that interactions can be pleasant and fun rather than stressful for that child's sensory system. I do recommend getting a speech-language pathologist to work with you and your family, specifically if your child is very young, an early intervention specialist, someone who specializes in birth to 3 years old. After that, you probably, if you're having issues in this area, you probably want to get your child assessed for sensory processing challenges. There are some locations, some institutes who specialize in this, but they're not very common. And so the video series that I did on that may be helpful to you, but having an occupational therapist who's a specialist in this area work with you, give you an assessment, help you get some exercises in place that can help your child, that can be very, very helpful. When I'm talking about early intervention, the reason why that is so important is because birth to 3 years old, this is when the most neuronal connections are made in the brain. And this is before many children are diagnosed with any sort of delay. So that window is missed. Now, learning windows never close completely. We always have the opportunity to learn, and we're always capable of learning. But that very important period can't be made up. Once it is done, there's those connections, that the fast growingness of those connections, the speed of what's happening in the brain, that window does kind of shut. That does not mean that your child is stuck the way that he or she is. Of course not. Like I said, there's always an opportunity for more growth. But if you notice at 2 months old that your child is really having difficulty calming and learning to self-soothe, if you notice by 6 months that your child won't look at you, gets very upset when there's a loud noise, more so than other children of his or her age. These are things that can be assessed. It's very hard to find someone who will take you seriously when your child is very young. But if you are persistent, you can find someone who's well educated enough to be able to assist you. And I recommend perhaps a DIR affiliated professional, because this framework is a framework that very much believes that the earlier the better, and will help you even virtually. If you're in a place where there is not a qualified professional to help you, you can get help. So don't put it off because of all those neurons connecting in that beautiful little brain. The sun is setting and coming in my window. I'm filming this a little later than I intended today. So I'm going to wrap it up by telling you a little story about 2 children I worked with. One is Ryland. I told you about Ryland. He was 3 years old when I started working with him. And almost every time a human being interacted with him, he would melt down. He would just start crying and screaming. One time I was there for my full session, and he did not stop screaming the whole time. His parents thought that I was making everything worse, because every time I would come over, he would have a meltdown. Whereas their mission was, whatever he wants, we must do it to prevent this problem. Well, that's not going to help. If you arrange the world around this child, he's not going to learn to keep himself calm when things are stressful or tough. He's not going to be able to function in the world. So we can't follow that plan. I worked with him for a number of years, but he did not need that full time in order to learn this skill. He was 3 years old and did not have this developmental capacity. He could not remain calm. He could not show interest in the world because he was so upset about someone touching his train. In fact, when I first arrived, I couldn't even enter. They had a sunroom off the back of their house, and that's where all the trains were. And if he was playing trains, no one could enter that room or he would melt down. And so we worked on that, and we worked on that by slowly, I went into the room. First, I would just sit at the edge, and then I would scoot my chair forward a little bit more, and I would talk to him while he was playing with his trains. And he did not like that either. So he tried to get me to be quiet, and I'd say, oh, sorry. But then I would talk again. And, how many times can you have that same overreaction to a very calming thing that really isn't all that upsetting? Your sensory system slowly adapts. Your brain adapts to what you experience. If all you experience is silence, then the noise of a tiny little bird chirping is going to sound really loud. I made sure that he was experiencing a little bit of pressure, but I tried to assess and carefully administer just the right amount of pressure so that he was in the zone of proximal development. He was uncomfortable, but he was not out of control. That is the story of Ryland. He recently graduated from high school in a mainstreamed program. He does have some learning differences. I did not continue working with him once I moved to Minnesota because he was one of my Arizona clients. But that was absolutely one of my very favorite families I ever worked with. What a delightful child. And what a delightful family. I'm so thankful that I got to learn from them. Another child that I worked with also did not have this developmental capacity. A difference being he was 10 when I met him. I did not actually work with him very long because I did not see how I could be successful. And that is a sad, sad story. He had never learned to calm himself, and his family had the exact same response, which was to give him whatever he wanted so that he would not cry, scream, throw a fit. And I realized that this is a real difficulty for families, but giving the child whatever he or she wants is not the answer. The answer is slowly adjusting what we present to the child. It's a long process. But this child was so violent by the time that I met him that if you did not give him a chicken nugget right when he asked for one, you had to say, okay, and put in the microwave right that minute, or he would have such a huge tantrum that he would start hitting and kicking. He was larger than I was at this time. His parents would have to, if this happened to them, which it regularly did, his mom was pregnant when I met them, they would have to try to coordinate to herd him into a special room that they had and hold the door shut. And this door had holes in it. It was not a safe environment for any of them, nor for the child, nor for me. And his family was not willing to put up with the challenge of ever not immediately giving him what he wanted. In this case, it was such a fragile situation that I was not going to not give him what he wanted. I was going to slowly increase the time between when he wanted it and when he got it. Slowly increase that time. And then eventually we would have moved to maybe saying, oh, chicken nuggets, all gone. I don't know what's an option. Another thing he liked was French fries. So then I could say French fries instead. So I could get him to be more flexible in his preferences so that those behaviors would decrease. I didn't get the chance because I just did not, his family did not want me to do any of those things. They, I guess, just wanted to carry on doing what they were doing, which was clearly not working very well. This is the reason why I talk about early intervention and dealing with problems when you see them. Because if you don't, children learn how their bodies learn what is okay and what isn't. And everyone gets in the habit of not pushing at all. And if we don't learn new things, if we don't experience new things, if we can't adjust to different sensory experiences, to different abilities to eat certain things, then we're not going to be able to function in the world, and we may end up a danger to our families and to society in general. I do not want that for anyone's child or for any individual. Okay, that was a very grim way to end this video, but perhaps it will be encouraging because you can go see the Developmental Capacities Assessment Checklist in the box below. And in the next video, we will talk about developmental capacity number 2, which will be super fun. Just because I'm talking about developmental capacity number 1 today and next time number 2 does not mean that a child will be moving through these a week at a time. These are very slow developing things that we have to work on for quite some time. And once again, please get a professional involved if at all possible. If you don't live in the wilderness somewhere, you should be able to find some sort of professional to help you work with your child. There is a link below for professionals who follow this particular model, and that would be a good plan if possible. Although you're the grown-up in your child's life, and you can learn these skills too, how to support the development of these capacities. Thanks for being here. It was nice chatting with you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. See you next time. Bye.